I'm Josh Constine, the editor of TechCrunch. And you might already know one of our speakers. He was an early employee and co-founder of some iconic startups. He was a partner at Y Combinator, and he's become a super prolific angel. And his wife is a total badass and clothing brand magnate. Please give a warm welcome to Garry Tan.
Yeah, Garry.
Oh, and there's some guy here that's Serena Williams' husband as well. But I really want to get into the relationship between you two. So one of the hardest parts of startup life is maintaining the relationship between co-founders.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know, what made you two fall in love originally?
What was it, Garry? I interviewed Garry to get into Y Combinator.
Accepted me.
Accepted. Best decision of my life. And I don't know, we just enjoyed working together.
I mean, at the end of the day, Alexis is truly a builder, and just as for Initialize, what we want to be all about is game-recognized game. So let's find other people who are engineers, designers, and product people who are going to go and create things that people really want. And so I'm very lucky that I had a 20-minute, 30-minute Skype conversation with you, and you saw something in us that helped us a lot.
I did, and I continue to ride those coattails, Garry. And it's important because I think we coach founders on this a lot now. And the fact that a great co-founder partnership is one that isn't just a friendship, it is a values alignment. And I think that in particular, I was just talking about that on stage, I think that in particular is what has made Initialize so successful, because we don't see this as a zero-sum game. And I think a lot of the people in venture do.
Yeah, it's really strange. In finance, venture capital is classically this very white glove, financially oriented thing. And I think it's very new to have someone, or a set of teams investing that basically had built it already. And so that's what we want to be.
So a lot of people, when they start companies, they want to start it with their best friend. That can be difficult sometimes. Maybe the skills don't always match up. But what do you see as sort of red flags or some opportunities that co-founders out there could have to mend their relationship or improve their relationship? What's something they should watch out for early that could fester into some bigger problem?
Little tells are like if founders are talking over one another to answer questions and it's not clear, sort of roles and responsibilities. Those can get fixed, but it's an interesting tell. I think there is this, the chief issue, which is when you're friends with someone, there are just things you don't talk about because you want to preserve that relationship. And unfortunately, so much of business is having hard, frank, important conversations that I think do help you as a friend as well, but are easier to avoid if you've just known this person as someone you go out and party with and not someone you have to have hard conversations with.
So the willingness to get a little bit vulnerable, talk about stuff that might be hard, that you wouldn't necessarily talk about with your friends, you see as important.
Yeah.
So at some point, though, all founders have that low moment. You wake up and life is just really difficult. Startups always judge themselves relatively, not just by what their absolute value is, but is it a little bit better momentum or worse momentum than yesterday? And that can really put startup founders on this emotional roller coaster that can be really tough for mental health. Yeah. Did you guys ever have a real tough low point like that? And how did you guys get out of that?
Garry?
Well, for me, I always really relied very heavily on getting help. So world-class athletes in the world, they have coaches, and every single day they get to the top of their field by having someone right beside them, helping them think through, how do I make the hardest decisions? I mean, that's what an exec coach would do. Or for an athlete, that's how do you get your peak performance? And so if you're making decisions day to day that might cost the company tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in the future, well, why wouldn't you have a coach to help you there?
Yeah, coaching has been at the core of so much of my personal development and then professional development. It's the reason why, actually, the coaching team that help us continue to improve and get better ultimately became the core team behind this company, Torch, that we invested in to bring it to scale. And we're top of the list in terms of evangelizing for it because it helps to have a third party in the room who understands all the context but isn't emotionally involved to hold everyone accountable, to hold you accountable to yourself and vice versa.
Yeah, it seems like it can be tough for some startup founders to accept that kind of help. People can get defensive or just feel like if I'm not crushing it outwardly in every respect, then my VCs are going to lose faith in me, my team is going to break apart, and things aren't going to work out. Is there a way that you've found that you can get founders to like accept that help more easily?
We bring it up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll candidly talk with our founders about the failures that I had with my startup. And so if I start there, then vulnerability can happen, and then we can actually talk about what's real, not what is going great. I want to hear about what's going great, but we need to spend most of our time on what could we fix, because there's going to be 1,000 things that are broken, and if we can fix those things, then we can actually make the hockey stick happen.
Yeah, I think when the startup founders actually get it from their VC, they feel like, oh, this is me like performance enhancement. This isn't me filling some hole or some problem that I have. Whereas if they just go out and say, oh man, it's just too much stress, I can't do it by myself, it can come off feeling a little bit more like they have something wrong with them. And I really think that all startups, we need to talk about this more in this industry. There's so many startup founders that are suffering through depression, through anxiety, because they feel like if they tell anyone how hard it is, that it might all fall apart. So I hope all you guys out there are willing to have more of those hard conversations.
100.
So in terms of an easier conversation, you guys are a little bit different in terms of the way you handle branding with your fund Initialized. A lot of venture capital funds are either named after the old dudes that founded them or some really vague tech word like index or matrix. But Initialized, you guys have a honey badger, this very fierce, notoriously little angry animal as your mascot.
Oh, yeah.
Could you tell me, what is the honey badger story?
I just have to have mascots for every company that I start, and Garry and I got to talking about what the mascot would be, and it seemed pretty spot on given the tenacity of the honey badger. Those are the elements that we look for in a startup. It's a scrappiness. It is a determination. There's obviously a great internet meme. Hopefully you're familiar with it. Honey badger don't give a bleep.
I don't know if they understand it, so I think one of you is going to have to give an impression of it.
I am not that good at impressions. But you'll
Good, Garry,
Google
it falls on you then.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You Google it. You'll see the original.
Google honey badger on YouTube.
Fantastic.
And you'll find it. You'll find the video.
And this is the first one, though, that I myself did not draw. And, I mean, Garry has created the logo for Palantir. I created the logo for Reddit. But we both realized that we needed a professional for this honey badger. So an artist named Dave Lee actually designed it for us. And, yeah, very proud of her. Her name is Hannah. Trivia, Hannah the honey badger.
So you've said it before that you want to start companies where people are willing to get your logo tattooed on them.
Yes.
Has anyone tattooed Initialized on themselves? Please tell me one of you guys is about to expose your tattoo right now.
Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. We did get a cake yesterday that had a honey badger emblazoned on it, but it's only a matter of time.
Okay, so Initialize seems to invest with more conviction than a lot of funds who kind of try to wait and see what's going to happen with a startup before just jumping all in. But that can sometimes, and when you go that hard that early, you can go astray sometimes. So why is this a winning strategy, and how do you make sure you don't end up like completely on the wrong rail?
Well, one of the things that we use internally for deciding whether or not we would invest in a company is actually, well, would we go work there? Which is kind of what happens when you get Initialized as an investor. We will basically sit down with you and work with you month after month after month until you get product market fit. And so we kind of sit across from the founder and say, is that someone who, we would drop everything, and that's a mission that makes sense. That's a team that could actually build it. And if they build it, does it matter? Does it actually make the world a better place somehow? Which is kind of anathema, but I still believe that. I'm still a tech optimist at the end of the day.
I mean, we've seen this massive wave of backlash about tech. I think a lot of that's driven by the big tech giants through privacy and data collection, or just generally exploitative practices, as well as a lot of company culture issues. How do we prevent that same kind of backlash from seeping down towards the startup level?
I think so. I think entrepreneurship is always going to have some romanticism to it, because it is, whether it is in the United States or throughout all the nations of Europe and just throughout the world, this idea of starting something fresh and having no one believe in it but you, I think that will always be in some kind of way sacred. And then I think we marry that, at least ourselves, with our own AntiTech Titan thesis, where we look to invest in companies that are deliberately going against Amazon, for instance, because the rest of the Fortune 1000 needs some way to compete. They can't build the tech themselves. And Garry has this entire Star Wars metaphor around it. But like, we believe in the return of the Jedi. And we want to invest in those companies to defeat the evil empire.
Yeah, I mean, the difficult thing about the Valley is that once you become truly successful, the Jedi become the new empire.
Yeah, tell me more about this analogy, because I think a lot of people are trying to figure out, how do I build a tech company that doesn't become the evil giant that everybody hates?
That is a TBD. I think
so it's impossible to get big and rich without becoming hated?
It is.
Board control.
Yeah, I think there are mechanisms. I think the most encouraging thing I've seen is the founders that we meet with now are far more thoughtful than certainly I was 13 years ago, and I think founders were a decade plus ago, because now they've seen what billions of users looks like and that kind of leverage looks like, and they are more thoughtful in how they're building their companies and the practices they're using. This company, Standard Cognition, which is doing, I mean, our competitor to Amazon Go in terms of instant checkout, they aren't storing, deliberately, they aren't storing any facial recognition data or any imagery whatsoever of the faces of people who come into stores. And that's out of principle, because they don't ever want to have this data and they don't need it.
And that's on day one. Day one, they knew when we get 1,000 stores, when we get 3,000 stores, we're going to have camera footage of people's faces. And the classic thing that, what would corporations like? They'd like to see, identify specific people and see exactly what they want to buy. Yeah. And just day one, if you want a contract with Standard Cognition, if you want that, you're not getting a contract with them.
Does that morality become sort of a business liability, though?
Well, they have really, really good tech. So it's the only place that can actually do camera-only Amazon Go-style cashierless checkout.
And I think long-term, with smarter and more privacy-aware consumers, it becomes an asset. It becomes a reason to go shop at that store because you know that your privacy is being respected. I think long-term, that's where it goes. I'm hoping. I'm showing my bias here because I know there's a lot of there's a lot of evidence to show a lot of apathy and sort of indifference, certainly in the U.S. to this. But I think the trends here around GDPR and everything else are going to keep flowing west, and we will have a population that cares a lot more about these things.
Yeah, we're going to see privacy tech. We're going to see like decentralization again. You know, there's a crypto stage someplace around here where that's really the story. How do you take back control from these giant, the mega tech companies? And I think that the next 10 years will really be a story of that.
So you guys have a pretty heavy thesis around this idea around like groceries and shopping between Instacart and Standard Cognition. Just give us where do you see grocery shopping? What is that going to look like 5 years from now?
The biggest dynamic that I worry about and think about is how much of retail today gets upended. Simply because you can imagine a future in a decade where there won't be people working checkout. And my first job was in retail. Like the parts that I liked least about the job were exactly the things that software can do better, cheaper, faster. And I think the dynamic in the stores change. I think there will be fewer people working in retail, but the people who are working there will be focused around service. They'll be experts. They'll be able to be helpful as opposed to just try to upsell you. And I think that dynamic changes, but the other reality is we need more solutions to deal with all of the people that are going to be displaced as a result, because there will be fewer people needed for those retail jobs. And that's where we're hoping and where we're investing that software can either create new marketplaces for jobs that humans are exceptionally good at, or basically find ways to retrain and re-educate.
I really hope we can get more investment funneled towards that area. I think we're looking at some really ugly political developments if we don't figure out how to 100%. Make more people feel seen in the modern economy. But speaking of making people feel seen, I feel like you guys do this better on Twitter than almost any VC that I've tracked. you guys go to bat for your startups. Like when they have a launch, when they need a hire, when something happens, you guys are there on Twitter in a way that I don't see anybody else as like selflessly use their platform. And you especially, Alexis, as you've become more of this like mainstream celebrity recently, you get those eyeballs, and that can be really valuable to your startups. Why do you guys do that, and why don't other VCs do that?
I'm just following Garry's lead. Because during all of we were the first seed investor in Coinbase, and Garry was very actively and thoughtfully, keyword, tweeting about crypto and built this legendary following to the point now where people thank him for making them millionaires. I mean, hopefully they liquidated before the crash, but I think it is a candor that people find refreshing. And frankly, like, it's our job. Like, we are there to support our companies. When we're making that investment, I want to treat that company like I would if I were an actual co-founder. And it's just fun.
Yeah. I mean, when we invest, we want it to be something that people actually want. Yeah. And then we're putting our name behind something, saying, this is the engineering team that will ship.
They're going to build it.
You can count on this. And if you try it and it doesn't work, well, I'm going to go talk to that founder. You can tweet at me and say, hey, that didn't work, and let's go fix it. And so it truly is, they need to make something that people love. That's at the end of the day what's important, and so we have to stand by that.
I feel like that must motivate the startups too, because they're like, once you guys go to bat for them on Twitter, they're like, oh man, we really got to like come through. Otherwise, we make them look like idiots, which probably is not going to go well for them long term. But speaking of how how startups can do the best that they can and how founders can navigate this journey, there's a lot of great minds out there in mediocre tech jobs. Maybe that's working for like a big startup that's lost momentum, or some big incumbent that really just needed technology talent. What's the best way for a promising technologist, engineer or otherwise, to find their startup idea and roll the dice?
The question that I always ask is, what do you understand that nobody else understands? And that's sort of the classic problem for, I was a 22-year-old Stanford engineer who basically could program almost anything, but I didn't have any sort of special skills yet. I had to go off and learn about, well, all of these other things that other people didn't just come out of school with. And so the most interesting startups that we really love, they go out and they find the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper, and they say, this is it, and I'm going to devote my life to that. And that can be incredibly powerful. Every startup that has turned out to be a billion-dollar success for us, it took some sort of special insight that someone basically was willing to devote their life to.
So just to recap some of the awesome insights we got from these panelists, game recognized game. When you guys take your venture capital thesis, it's about being able to recognize talent in people. And that often means the co-founder relationship, making sure people aren't talking over each other, that they're talking about hard things, that they're willing to be vulnerable and get coaching when they need it. You don't always have to be crushing it. Find VCs that can actually support you through the tough times too. Maybe you want to have a mascot, something that is a brand that you can be associated with, that creates more of a sense of mission and purpose. Startups are always going to have that sense of romanticism about them, but it's about finding people who really believe in you and will put that conviction in. And if you have strong enough tech, you can actually use your own position to drive a new sense of morality for the world. And we're going to see a lot of these industries upended, and a lot of people are going to have to change jobs. But if you can go out there and find something that you know better than anybody else, you'll be able to create jobs for that next generation. And I hope to see you guys do it. Thank you all for watching, and thank you, Initialize, for coming here.
Thank you, guys.
That was really good. Nice job, Josh.
That's so awesome.
That was great, man. Yeah.